All right, in this video, I'm going to take you through 5 charts that demonstrate disturbing trends in the U.S. economy. Now, some of it looks normal on the surface, but just below the headline numbers, there's real trouble brewing. There are a few signs that the Trump administration is also clearly aware that its policies are wreaking havoc in record time. But even if they suddenly decide to, work for the American people instead of against them, it might be too late. UNFTR. So in my mind, it's not a matter of if, but when the economy falls into a deep recession. The only real questions are how deep and how long. That's what she said. The 5 charts I'm going to show you paint a pretty ugly picture of what's to come if you dig into the numbers and read between the lines. Now that said, everything is really erratic and unpredictable right now, so timing certain events will prove to be impossible. And remember, one of our rules of thumb before we get into this. Say it with me. The market is not the economy. The stock market's gonna do what it's gonna do. If anyone has ever asked you, with a straight face, how's your portfolio looking these days? This video is not for you. Unless you're a senior citizen with just enough tucked away in an IRA and together with Social Security, this is enough to live on. In that case, sure. But the vast majority of Americans don't have a lot of skin in the equities game. And here's the last thing I'll say about the stock market. There's a chance that when the economy falls into a recession that the market will follow suit. But don't be surprised if it dips and then comes back way before the economy does. The stock market is made up of wealthy individuals and institutional investors, and we've demonstrated in a prior video how the market is already being propped up by a handful of technology stocks and institutional money that has nowhere else to go to seek consistent returns. PE ratios, the value of a stock relative to its performance, are currently very high compared to historical averages. So in layman's terms, it means that stock prices are higher than their earnings say they should be as of right now. Now, I've prattled on for a year, since actually we released our Project 2025 video a year ago this month, about how Trump was going to win again if the Democrats didn't message the economy better, and that if Trump did win, he was going to drive the economy into the toilet on purpose. So obviously I'm on the best worst roll ever. And so now for my next shitty prediction, when this shit does hit the fan, here's a summary of Trump's speech. Kamala Harris, Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, Barack Obama, they failed you. They created the terrible economy, recession we have now. It's all on them. Their woke DEI policies have put us into the ground. My bigly beautiful economy that I frankly left them. I handed it to them. I mean, nobody had ever seen anything like it before. They said, Mr. President, how did you make such a bigly, beautiful, amazing economy? I said, well, this is what I do. I always win. A lot of winning, you see. And so now I can't win. We're going to have to do terrible things to people in order to make America great again because Biden. Now, that being said, there's something curious going on at the White House right now that doesn't make any sense on the surface, but it kind of makes sense if you know Donald Trump. As these 5 charts will demonstrate, the cracks are already showing up as a direct result of his policies. He's driving it into the ground, but it's almost like he's kind of waking up to it. The reversals on tariffs after tripling down on them, seemingly telling Doge to cool it a little bit, signing executive orders written in a way that can't possibly get through the courts. I think there are 2 factions in the White House. The true believers on the Russell vote side of the spectrum and I'm only guessing here, maybe somebody like Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary. He's not an idiot, and as far as I can tell, he's not an ideologue either. Yeah, he's a hedge fund dude, but he's hardly a far-right creature. So it's like someone's in Trump's ear and letting him know that this is falling apart quickly. And I don't think that Trump actually wants that. I believe him when he said he didn't read Project 2025 because he's functionally illiterate. He has no grasp of economic policy, never sits through a proper briefing. He wanted to get elected so that he didn't go to jail. And he probably wants to stay in the job like a gilded dictator and just make speeches while pilfering the Treasury. But he also wants to be adored. And it's possible that even he is surprised at the fallout from some of the Doge activities and, most certainly, the persistent inflation that will only worsen in the months to come. At some point, he won't be able to just look back and blame Biden. So let's take a look at these 5 charts to illustrate some troubling trends. 2 notes to bear in mind before we do. The first is that this economy has been redlining for a long time. I've said also for a long time that the average American never fully recovered from the financial crisis. Having a day job and barely getting by does not a recovery make. Only the upper echelon of our society has pulled away from the pack in dramatic fashion. The second note is that these in no way reflect the totality of economic precarity that Americans face. Plenty more charts and graphs where these came from, believe me. But as they are up-to-date data releases, we're going to focus in on these 5. The first is a headline that most people talk about when it's released, at least for a minute: consumer confidence. Consumer confidence is a survey-based data point. It's not reflective of any transactional data. It's just a reflection of sentiment at a moment in time. So as such, it's something to observe and note, but not really to build a hard analysis around. But the reason I want to lead with this before we get into the weeds and other data is to demonstrate how quickly things turn when people sense volatility. So a look at this chart from the conference board. You can see from the shaded areas where recessions have occurred. Prior to a recession, consumer confidence is high, so people are spending money. And you can see what happened during the financial crisis of 08 and 09 and just how long it took for confidence to get back to pre-crisis levels. Obviously, the pandemic cratered confidence again before it picked back up when federal relief payments came through to citizens and small businesses alike. It dips again when inflation settles in a bit, but remember that we still have historically low unemployment, so people are holding out with a bit of optimism because they have a job. But take a look at the dip from January to February this year already. These kinds of drops raise warning flags to economists. Now, it's similar to increases and sharp declines that are characteristic of sentiment since the pandemic, so I don't want to read too much into a single data point, especially one that's based on a survey and not on hard metrics. However, the thing to look out for is what happens in the coming months, because as you see, leading into the financial crisis, when people have trouble paying their mortgages, car payments, student loans, home heating bills, grocery bills, sentiment tanks, and it can feed on itself. It's like a bad feedback loop. So I call your attention to this chart to set the table for the next 4. And the next one is job cuts. A firm called Challenger, Gray & Christmas has been tracking job cuts in the economy for decades. The last time employers cut as many jobs as they did this February was in 2009. When the shit was really hitting the fan in the financial crisis. There's a lot to unpack here. First off, the DOGE cuts to federal employees is in this data, but only just starting to show up. There are more to come because they only started taking effect in February. So March and going forward is going to be really telling. But what this tells you is that layoffs had already started to pick up outside of the government sector. So business and industry might already be doing some belt tightening. The headline number that gets the attention in corporate media, however, is the unemployment figure, which only ticked up slightly from 4% to 4.1%, so the media isn't sounding the alarm yet. But there's way more to employment and unemployment data, as we've talked about before. There are 2 measures of employment that are way more valuable than the headline number of unemployment: the labor participation rate and the prime age labor participation rate. We did a complete breakdown of this, by the way, in our AI job apocalypse episode, so I won't rehash it except to say that there are a tremendous amount of people on the sidelines in this economy that aren't being counted, from boomers to young people, from students and military members. So we're going to want to keep an eye on these figures to really assess the health of the economy, because the unemployment rate doesn't factor in 2 huge things: the loss of immigrants in the lower end of the economy and wages. These are typically competing factors, mind you. Fewer immigrants should mean, and has meant, higher wages because it's harder to fill jobs. But we're not seeing an increase to wages. What all of this tells us is that this is a very fragile labor market that is holding together in terms of employment in total, but not necessarily in terms of mobility and spending. If the economy continues to shed jobs at the rate that it did in February, and doesn't replace them at the speed we've become accustomed to under Biden and Trump 1.0, then it will start to hit the unemployment rate as well. And once you lose the narrative on the headline number, the unemployment rate, it has a similar effect to sliding consumer confidence. It becomes a vicious cycle. So look out for this chart in March. If employers continue with layoffs and DOGE keeps gutting the federal workforce, this might quickly turn into a crisis of their own design. Now, the next one is where we get into the weeds and start turning over rocks to find the real story of this economy. And check this out. Take a look at these figures. This is the story of inequality, and it's not a good sign. These are the 60-day auto lease payment delinquency rates. The blue line represents prime rate borrowers, so people with good credit. The figure is slightly elevated as of January, which is a troubling indicator because these are the stable to high credit rating borrowers. But take a look at that red line, the subprime borrower line. It's off the charts, with no historical comparison since they started tracking it. It's blown past the height of the financial crisis and the peak inflation data and interest rate high. The low end of the income spectrum in the United States is getting absolutely hammered. This is a reflection of multiple factors. First is high interest rates. Subprime rates make these kind of payments untenable in the best of times. The second is inflation. Every dollar made by people punished by these rates buys less and less in the real economy. Everything becomes more expensive. A millionaire feels no difference if a grocery bill for the family goes from $150 to $250. But this kind of inflation is catastrophic for low-income families. And the third is wages. When wages are stagnant, especially at the low end of the wage economy, inflation and interest are a double whammy. It's a compounding effect that makes things really, really beyond difficult. And we already know that Americans are carrying more debt than they ever have before. But optimistic Wall Street economists will tell you that the debt that we're all carrying is manageable because the debt service on it is the same percentage of household income that it always has been. So you're spending as much to maintain that debt as you always have been. And that may be true for the middle and upper middle classes. But here's the direct evidence that the poor and lower end of the working class is already in a severe crisis. It's only a matter of time before this kind of crisis begins to work its way through the whole economy. So with that, let's dig into inflation. So know how we just talked about unemployment only ticking up 0.1% from 4 to 4.1 and how it masks the underlying issues of the labor market? Same thing with inflation. I know this one is a little more difficult to see, but it's important. This is how the Bureau of Labor Statistics drills down into inflation. It's hard to see again, but the total cost of living rose 3% over the past 12 months. That's the headline number. And it's more than the Federal Reserve wants, and it's going to continue to punish the consumer. Okay, so the Fed's been trying to get something called disinflation, and that's what we've been experiencing, a slowdown in inflation. What consumers really want is deflation, where prices go back to pre-pandemic levels. But if that were to happen, just because of the way our economy is structured, it means that we are in complete economic freefall. So I just want to be clinical and unemotional about this. What we're looking for, theoretically, is disinflation at a minimum. So let's go back to the chart here. A survey of mainstream economists believed that inflation would decrease from 2.9 to 2.8% from December to January. Instead, it went the other way. For economists, this is a radical move. For consumers, it's just a continuation of an insulting pattern. But here's the crazy part. If we look at the January numbers, that column all the way down, the only figure that went down was apparel. Basically, holidays are over, so it's time to put everything on sale. But everything else went up. Food, energy, especially home heating fuel, used automobiles, housing, transportation, you name it. This is a terrible sign because no one aspect of the economy was dragging this forward. It was across the board. So now the Federal Reserve, because they operate under this ridiculous dual mandate that I've criticized before and I won't get into now, they won't bring rates back down in the coming months, which means those subprime and even prime lending rates don't budge, which means more default. Credit card debt and household debt keeps rising. And if unemployment increases, their move is typically to cut rates. But if inflation stays high, they're stuck. And why would inflation stay high? Trump's tariff and immigration policy. Goods will be more expensive, so sales will decrease, which will prompt companies to lay people off. And when the companies look to hire low-wage people, like immigrants, to fill certain positions, there won't be enough. And the poorest people in the country, the ones defaulting on those auto payments, fall out of the labor market entirely and look to the federal government for support Doge and the Republicans will have a message for them. Sorry, pull yourself up by the bootstraps in the economy we just destroyed. We having fun yet? Last one. Manufacturing data from the Institute for Supply Management, or ISM. A pretty notable survey of the manufacturing economy. Here's where this stuff gets tricky, and why conservative media outlets can frame bad news as good news. Again, the headline number heard across Fox News was that manufacturing expanded in the first quarter. Now let's look at the breakdown of the numbers, though. First off, it grew, but less than expected, which is fine. Predictions and opinions are like assholes. Everyone has one and they usually stink. But let's look closer at the direction and the rate of change. You see by the top figure that the overall index grew, right? But new orders are contracting while production is increasing. Hold that thought. Inventories are contracting, but so are back orders. Hold that thought too. Imports are growing faster. Okay, so let's put this all together. These figures are contradictory in so many ways. So new orders are declining, but production is increasing. So manufacturers are getting after it, right? They're making more stuff, even though new orders aren't coming in as quickly. So their inventories are declining as a result, meaning they're getting this stuff out the door because of the high production. They're making things quickly, right? And back orders are contracting, which means they're getting on top of their orders that might have been building up in the past. They're working through new orders, old orders, everything. So production is up. Got it. But new orders are down. Also, imports are increasing faster than they have, but supplier deliveries are slowing faster than they have. Okay, so what does this all mean? It means that manufacturers are they're importing as much as they can in raw materials ahead of the tariffs, even though they don't necessarily have the new orders to support this activity. And deliveries are slowing down because there's a burgeoning supply chain snarl to get all this stuff out. So freight is more expensive now, even before the tariffs, and it will ultimately show up in the pricing of the finished goods. And that means that inflation will be here even if tariffs don't go into place. You see, by creating chaos around tariffs, Trump has single-handedly confused the global trade market. And if you recall, the supply chain issues and the subsequent price hikes that we had after the pandemic, that's what he's manifesting all by himself. But even if you strip all the supply chain and tariff nonsense away, the bottom line is that there's an existing softness in the market anyway. When you put it all together, you know what they call this moment in time? A bubble. But here's the weird part. Trump has the pin. He could pop it at any moment. Implementing tariffs will pop the bubble, and a global slowdown will ensue because inflation will rip here at home, and retaliatory measures will spread inflation across the globe. But for some reason, he just won't pop it. It's like he has cold feet or something. Despite all the bluster and the threats to bring us right to the edge, he keeps backing off. Is it possible there are competing narratives in his camp? I'm still of the belief that the Russell vote, Steve Bannon spectrum of nihilism is governing the actions of the White House, and that they actually want to tear it all down and leave us with a 19th century style economy that only serves the elite. But it's possible that others close to him, again, like Secretary Bessent, didn't sign up for this, or think that they would at least go through with it if they did. Now, this is pure speculation on my part, mind you, but it just doesn't add up. If they're going to loot the treasury and destroy democracy beyond repair, then fucking get on with it. The sooner it burns down, the sooner we'll rise from the ashes. Or something like that. Anyway, I know economics can be boring, so hopefully this all made sense and gave you a little insight into the numbers behind the numbers. And if you like this stuff, I'm happy to do it on a more regular basis, so let me know in the comments if you think it's helpful. Also, make sure to sign up for our free weekly newsletter at UNFTR.com, where we explore these kind of topics in addition to curating progressive news stories, book and podcast recommendations, and original material every week. And if you're really bold and want to be part of this community, consider taking out a membership. At a minimum, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, blah, blah, blah. Go to UNFTR.com for all the things, and for now, here endeth the lesson.